bulldozer operator obviously didn't know what it was. So we're able to estimate the over-winter survival. These are our high school students that became our surveyors on the field, and these were our ratineers. So shortly after we gave talks in the school, we were out in the afternoon, and these kids with nothing to do had slingshots and were shooting at anything that moved. So we gathered them around. I think Helen did the bulk of the talking. Her Spanish is understandable, mine's not. And we convinced them to not do that, and then we said, we need some mice for our traps. Where we can get mice? And they all in unison said, our kitchen. So we went to town, bought the town out of snap traps, and gave every kid 2 snap traps with a promise of a couple, I forget how many pesos, but it was a coat and a quarter in Canadian. And said we paid them in the morning for whatever, and every kid came back with 4 mice. So they got 2 before they went to bed and 2 in the morning. And that went on for a couple of weeks, so I never did get a travel plane for that. But these kids, and then of course we left the mouse traps with them as kind of a public health benefit. Enrique decided to design this brochure where a grandfather's talking to the father and the kids about how important owls are and not to shoot them, not to slingshot them, not to spray them, because the owls are going to get insects and mice for the landowner. So we produced thousands of those and distributed them. Another thing we survived, we weren't in this building, but we were sitting in a restaurant in Colima with 2 American expats that we spent a lot of time working with. And the ground started shaking, and I and the wife ran out, and the husband and Helen are sitting on these plastic chairs, swaying back and forth with this big cement roof over them. And I said, Helen, get out of there. She says, no, you get a way better ride if you stay seated. What? Well, I wasn't sure, but I wasn't going to count it. So anyway, this just shows a variety of places that the owls were in Texas. So we often think, boy, the owls have gone to Mexico, the habitat's not as good. The habitat is way worse for them in Texas, where it's cotton fields with Caliche Road. If they're lucky, there's a culvert that's squashed down so they can get in, but bigger predators can't. A lot of bare ground for the owls in Texas. So what happens in the spring? So here's where you have to keep your thinking hats on for stable isotopes. So remember I said that we take a feather in the winter, we can plot back where it went, where it came from the previous summer. So the same thing applies when it comes back. It's still carrying those flight feathers, these tail feathers. So what we started doing is catching birds in Alberta and Saskatchewan, taking a tail feather in the spring before they molted. That means we can figure out where it was in the previous year, right? So are they coming back to the steady areas? Because we knew from banding they weren't. Remember when I was recruited to look for them in the winter, the researchers up here said they're not coming back, they're not getting their banded birds back. So are they dying, or are they just gone somewhere else in the summer? So Jason did this as also part of his PhD, and what we found is that about 1/3 of the birds came back to within 250 kilometers. So in the Regina Plain, about 1/3 of the owls will come back from one year to the next. 2/3 don't, but they're coming back up to 500 kilometers, 750, and then some of them are actually from much further away. And 2 in our sample actually had feathers that were grown in Mexico the previous year. So now we've got a huge dispersal issue. So only 1/3 of them are coming back to where they were the previous year. 2/3 are moving away, and the mean is 400 kilometers. So if we think of where Alberta and Saskatchewan are in the range of the burrowing owl, that 400 kilometers means most of them are going to the south or coming from the south, right? It's not going 360 degrees. So what Jason did then was do a rough calculation of how many owls are there in, this is just reviewing. How many owls are there, what's the area of occupancy in the 4 adjacent states in the US compared to Alberta and Saskatchewan? We had samples here, so we could look at dispersal return rates from Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. And what he calculated is that the net loss of birds from dispersal is about 20% per year. So they're not dying, they're just short stopping in the US. The scenario is they're flying north, they find a suitable habitat, find a mate and nest there, they don't keep coming further north. So some birds from the US nest in Canada, some birds in Canada nest in the US, but the net difference is about 20% of the Canadian population each year. And then we had an owl that demonstrated that. The first one we put a satellite transmitter on. I told you about its trip down to Baja. We saw it there. In the spring it came north, just short of California. And then another neat thing happened. April 11th, April 16th, 5 days later, it's near Denver. It flew across the Rockies 350 kilometers per night to get to Denver. Then it just went a little bit further north to Fort Collins and nested there. So this was a female that nested in Alberta. She was successful, migrated south, did a big migration, big loop here, did this incredible flight, 350 kilometers a night, and then stopped and nested here, 1,000 kilometers short of Alberta. So here we are coming up with this theory that they're short stopping, and the first bird does it. And remember when I told you about the band recovery, when you got your first record? Don't discount it as a weird one. That might just be what's happening. So we've had other birds do that, go south and then come back to, one short stopped in Montana, one moved over from Grassland Park to Governor Walkerino PFRA. So we shorter distances, but still dispersals. So when we look at the distribution of burrowing owls, we know that we're at the northern edge. This is based on breeding bird surveys. We actually see the core of their range is Colorado, North Texas, and the adjacent states. So this is where there's a high density, and then there are lower densities. Birds are in Mexico, they're flying north. If there's a lot of vacant habitat here, our hypothesis is they're stopping, short stopping. Some make it north, some that were here the year before keep coming north, but the net effect is we're actually losing birds to the US. And then we had another remarkable bird to demonstrate dispersal in the species. We trapped it, actually Jason trapped a female burrowing owl in Saskatchewan on July 7th. She was banded, she was double banded, so there's no error in the records. And the same year on April 30th. So this female was nesting near Tucson, Arizona. She was in a burrow with a male, with a brood patch, with one young on April 30th. And we trapped her in July in Saskatchewan with a different male and 7 young in the same year. So she had had 2 broods, 1,875 kilometers apart. So backtracking the ages of these young, she had about 2 weeks to quit Tucson and fly north, and it was like, man, can they do that? And then we got the satellite telemetry record saying we can do 350 kilometers a night. So this is a piece of cake. It gives her a week to find a new guy instead of Saskatchewan to hitch up and start a family. So that was a pretty amazing record of dispersal. Shorts, oh, and so the stable isotope signature in her feathers showed she was from Montana. So she'd gone, we don't know where for the winter, short stopped in Arizona, had a fling on her way north, and got serious, and had a bigger family in southern Saskatchewan. Oh, and she was 1 year old. Hard to know what she'd do when she's older. So, in summary then, the proximal cause, the immediate cause, part of the problem here is the short stopping in the US. But the real problem is low productivity of owls. We're not producing enough, and the Americans aren't producing enough. And if there was lots of owls in that mixing, the short stopping wouldn't matter because there'd be lots of owls to fill up the US, and they keep coming north. So what can we do about it? This is QU. Yep. So one hopes when you're doing research you can come up with some outcome about what can we do. Yeah, just.
Hello, I'm Michelle, and I've been a project lead for the Burrowing Owl program for the past 2 years. I just wanted to give a quick update on what the park is doing to help our owl population and give some of our more recent results. So one of the objectives stated in our multi-species action plan is to increase the productivity of the burrowing owls within the park. So on top of protecting the breeding habitat, we're also supplementing their diet with mice. So every nest that Geoff and Helen find in the spring is supplemented with 28 mice per week for 7 weeks, starting on the estimated hatch date. And we try and spread this out over 2 to 3 visits per week. And we feed even in poor weather so that the owls have a consistent food supply throughout this time. And the number of 28 mice per week is based on some research that you guys and Troy did. And that is supposed to provide the owls with more than 3 times the metabolic requirements of an adult owl. So we don't expect the supplemental feeding to increase the numbers of breeding pairs that return to the park every year. As Geoff already mentioned, they don't always come back to where they were the year before. But we're hoping that in increasing the fledge rate of the owls, that we can at least slow the decline here and keep the area's population stable. And as you can see in this graph, since the feeding started in 2016, we've had a pretty stable number of breeding pairs living in the park. So since we've been feeding in the 3 years, 2016 to 2018, we've seen higher numbers of fledglings in the nests that were fed than in nests that were found later in the season and therefore not fed. So our fed nests from 2016 to 2018 averaged 6.3 young per nest, and our unfed nests, or the control nests, averaged 4.4 fledglings. And some of our fed nests even had as many as 9 young survive to fledge. So what we've seen in the last 3 years is that we've had some of the highest numbers of fledglings per nest in the 20 plus years that we've been monitoring burrowing owls here in the park. And that's it for our data, so I'll pass it on back to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, what's impressive here is the productivity of the last 3 years is as high as any other year, and that this was actually, we did a small supplemental feeding project here, and that's why the productivity is so high here. So obviously, this is the absolute number of young produced. And so we're actually producing more young now than in the years when the population was about 2005, remember, when there were actually more owls here. They weren't producing as many young as what we're able to do with supplemental feeding. So one of our recommendations is we need to expand supplemental feeding. It's almost too late to do that in Canada, as you've seen. So our hope is when we get this all written up and talked about in the U.S., we can actually get U.S. colleagues online to increase their productivity and try and stop the decline by producing more owls. So how can we help and conserve them? One is to do supplemental feeding. How long do we have to do that? Well, it depends how long we either need, one, to get owls in Canada, keep owls in Canada, or can we recreate the prairie conditions that would allow grasshoppers and mice and other critters to have super abundant years, so that year of 1997 occurs more frequently than it's not happening now. And basically we've changed the ecology of the prairie so much that that's not likely to happen. The other thing, and just remember, because Helen told me not to forget on the way down or I'd be in big trouble, is we've cultivated the best habitat, right? The reason that there are chunks of prairie left is that that's the crappy soil that's good for cows, but it's not good for wheat. So imagine the productivity on the good soils and the Chernozem soils in the Regina Plain, how many insects, how many mice they would have produced, how many burrowing owls they could have produced. So we need to conserve habitat, but we also need to start looking at the quality of the habitat we're conserving and whether in fact it's producing enough food items for the owls, or once the owls set up, we just have to do that food supplementation. It's not a big cost, it's not that invasive. I think it could be expanded so that it could be done by 4-H, it could be done by school kids, Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, whatever. Anyone that lives near an owl with a bit of training could then do that supplemental feeding and basically double the number of young produced. And then also I have to plug in the plug for their habitat, because Nature Conservancy is well represented here. They need to keep doing the work they're doing I met with one rancher once, and I wanted to visit owls that were on his property, and he made me come back for coffee. He says, one of the things that really bugs me is getting literature from environmental groups saying conserve habitat. He looked out over his field, he says, I own that habitat, what are they trying to tell me? And it's like, yeah, we need to tell him to keep doing what he's doing and make sure it doesn't get cultivated, because if it gets cultivated, then it's not going to be good burrowing owl habitat. We need wheat, we need grains, but at the same time we need a balance if we're going to conserve these species. So we have written a North American Conservation Action Plan. We recruited the kids in Valencienita. We came back 1 November, and these are our high school kids, and they painted this on the main wall in the town square. Conservation Together is pretty hard to see. We thought that was really cool. They've gone out and scraped up the money to buy the paint. We published a tri-national conservation action plan published by the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And you can Google that, or it's a simple website, www.cec.org. If you are bored one evening and want to read it, nobody's implemented it. So in conclusion, the largest single mortality factor, having gone through the whole year, I didn't actually talk about the winter mortality, it's about 20% based on our telemetry. The biggest single mortality factor is losing half the young before they even fledge. Anything you do after that is petty cash compared to fixing that 50%, which is supplemental feeding. And then you have twice as many young leaving. All the other mortality factors kick in, but you're starting with twice as many young. Michelle's already summarized this, feeding dead mice, and I think if it's done at a large scale, it has the potential to reverse the decline. So we have to thank all the landowners and land managers of native grasslands and their livestock. One warning to any of you that are students, don't study something for too long, or thank you for your interest.
Thank you so much for the awesome presentation. I learned so much. Thanks, Michelle, for the update about the park there. And Geoff, also thank you so much for your contribution to Burrowing Owl recovery. Everything from sitting on the recovery strategy to being stranded in the Mexican desert. Like, it sounds like you've had some amazing adventures. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to put a pitch out there that Prairie and Silver Sage actually has a supplemental burrowing owl feeding donation program. So if you'd like to essentially donate mice and sponsor an owl, you're able to do that. So there's just on the other side, there's a small museum there, and you can money in a box to donate mice for. So Michelle can go throw the mice down down the burrows. We've been doing this program for a few years, and Prairie Winds is a charitable organizations who are able to issue tax receipts, and we can just take your contact information up at the front there if you'd like a charitable tax receipt. So yeah, with that, I guess, does anyone have any questions for Geoff?
I just wanted to make a couple of comments. After Geoff's talking about the scale of the decline, but what Michelle and the park are doing, there's a couple other studies that support feeding even locally, because there's studies, for example, showing that if adults have lots of food locally, they spend less time away from the nest, and so there is less nest mortality. So that's one of them. Also, there are studies showing that successful nests, the adults are more likely to return. So if there's a rain event and they throw food down there and the nests don't fail, because that's usually a 3-day rain event to wipe out an entire nest. So if they feed during that critical period and the adults are successful, they're more likely to return to the area. Maybe not that burrow, but to the area. So there are reasons to do that.
Yeah, remember the graph of 30% came back within 250 kilometers. Those are often the successful birds. So the more successful birds, the bigger chance you have.
And even if only 3 to 5% of your juveniles are returning back, if you produce 50% more, you're getting back a couple of more young every year. That's still a couple more pairs. And you're at this level that we're at right now, then everything helps. Yeah.
I'm curious about populations of insects. And been really talk a lot about that and how that might have fluctuated over the years. My personal experience is that there are no insects.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, so there's,
And there are reasons for
yeah.
that.
No, and I'm glad you asked the question, because that gives me another 5-minute lecture. So there's a number of things. One is right now, there's a lot of publicity about insecticides killing bees. Well, bees are insects. Those insecticides, neonicotinoids, or units for short, are killing all insects. They're not just killing bees. It's just that beekeepers keep better track of that class of insects than most of us keep track of anything else. Any of you that are as old as me and have been driving a car, I can remember when I first started driving, I'd have to stop halfway through a tank of gas to clean the windshield of the gas station because it was just so full of ink. Now, we just drove down from Edmonton and I had to do something in Swift, so I cleaned the windshield, but I didn't need to. It's just not the insects there. So we're totally trashing the insects that are left. But the other thing we've done, and it's relevant to Burrowing Owls, is there used to be a locust, a big 4-inch long grasshopper in the Canadian prairies and the US prairies up until 1903-04. So these locusts were just like we read about once in a while in Africa and Asia. They burst out, there are millions of them, they eat everything green, and then they presumably lay eggs, they don't do that every year, but every few years you get these outbreaks. So there was a locust in North America that used to do that. The last outbreak was 1903-04, and they ate everything green from Calgary to Winnipeg, and they disappeared. So I talked to Dan Johnson in Lethbridge, a grasshopper expert, and he said those grasshoppers lay eggs in bare soil. So historically, they'd lay them in a buffalo wallow. In the spring, they hatch in the buffalo wallow and wander out and start eating. And what have we created on the prairies? Piles of created dirt fields. So they would lay eggs in the dirt field. Farmer comes along in the spring and plants, turns them all over. Those eggs are buried, they don't hatch. New species went extinct. So there's actually a book called The Locust. And in Wyoming, there's a glacier called Locust Glacier. And there are still layers of locust melting out at the snout of that glacier. So presumably the locust made a wrong turn, flew on top of the glacier, landed there, snowed on top, and there are now still layers of locust in a glacier in Wyoming, probably more than elsewhere. But this author documents the locust. So imagine to a burrowing owl, I know the other story of that. Imagine to a burrowing owl trying to feed its young, instead of having a tiny little grasshopper like we have now, it comes across these 4-inch long ones. That's like a meal for a day for a small young owl. So it'd be much easier for the male to get that food to those young owls than it is now. So I talked to Dan Johnson about grasshoppers, because we still have a variety of grasshoppers. And he said the outbreaks of grasshoppers we do get are less frequent, they're less intense, and they're a smaller geographic area. So that there isn't that food base for the owls. And I think part of that is we've chopped up the prairies, and a lot of the prairies into small pieces, so there isn't the size of an ecosystem for food like that to expand. So Lise Perot, who was a longtime resident here, and now unfortunately has passed on, translated a book, and it's called The First White Woman in the West. And so this was a lady, a French-Canadian, hooked up with a French-Canadian trapper and came west, ended up back at the Red River settlement in Winnipeg, or near Winnipeg, southern Manitoba. And in that book, she documents the first 5 years of trying to grow crops. So for 3 years, mice ate everything. For 1 year, the locust ate everything. And the 5th year, they finally got a crop. So there was a terrible start to the Red River settlement. Those would be 4 good years for burrowing owls and 1 bad year for burrowing owls. Depends on one's perspective. So yeah, food, we've totally changed the ecology of the prairies. And that's why I'm not sure how we can get that back. So in the interim, if we want to keep burrowing owls, we have to do the project that Michelle and I talked about. Yep.
A lot of these land use and ecosystem changes, though, occurred, a century ago, and well before the 90s. So what happened with the 95% increase that you mentioned since the late 80s?
That's what's the chemical. Somebody help me out. In the late 80s, we introduced the class of insecticides that are now close to northeast. It was in the late 80s when we introduced this insecticide. Neonics. But there's another category. Yeah. So the other thing, and Wes Olson isn't here, Wes told me this, also around that time, we, I don't remember the names, we also created advermectin, dorvermectin, which are insecticides that go on cattle. Okay? So when they kill internal and external parasites. When a cow poops, you get a cow pie, that insecticide is still active for 6 months. So Kevin Foote, an ag candidate in Lethbridge, says basically those cow pies are not getting eaten, which means all the insects that would come out those cow pies aren't going out into the environment. Right? So now we've nailed another food source. I always thought when I heard about neonics, well, it's on the farmland, the ranch land's still good. It's not good. Because all the cows are going around with the insecticide, which helps the cows. And so one of Kevin Foote's arguments is we shouldn't be doing that as much because we've almost wiped out dung beetles. Dung beetles are carbon sequesters. They take a ball of dung buried in the ground for their eggs, and that carbon, cubic meter by cubic centimeter rather, gets buried in the ground and sequesters. And now the cow pie just sits there, and he's actually measured how much pasture is lost by all these cow pies that take 2 or 3 years to break down.
So aerial insectivore is also defined around the same time, so there's that whole suite of those. But also, I think we may have just reached a tipping point. The fragmentation of the habitat both in the summer and winter, and Geoff didn't mention this, we didn't show the huge map of the prairie dogs that extended. So I always think of those owls migrating, they need to find a hole every night. They've got to hide their butts every night. And when all the dog towns were decimated, that makes it really tough for them. That's a tough migration for them. But I think it's a tough world. I'm actually surprised they're still around. Every time I think a bird that's got to travel and find a hole in the ground every night, not just hide in a tree, that's really, really a tough thing to be able to do.
And although a lot of the prairies were cultivated in decades, we're still cultivating native prairie.
Still.
Right? There was a pasture sold just west of here, and I don't know the names and all the locations, but it was bought by somebody with money, and they paid somebody then to cultivate it and start doing farming. So we're still cultivating prairies. I don't know what the balance is of money from cows versus money from crop over 2 years, but we're still cultivating. So that's where we need organizations like Nature Conservancy to tie up the land. And put cows on it, so you can do it without the ivermectins. At least make sure it doesn't get cultivated. And that was the message from the rancher just west of here when I had coffee with him. Stop the cultivation and start to what it does.
I have a question, Geoff. You talked a lot about what landowners can do to, the best thing landowners can do for burrowing owls is to conserve their land. Are there other things that landowners can do that would help the species?
Well, there could be. I mean, as Helen said, if they're not nesting, they need holes in the ground, they need cover, shelter belts. I mean, it horrifies us driving down from Edmonton every year. There's another millions of miles of shelter belts. Shelter belt, if they don't have a hole in the ground and they're not nesting, they can still go into a shelter belt and hide for the day. As Helen said, when they're migrating or dispersing. So there's things like that. Beyond that, I mean, not killing ground squirrels, so that away from prairie dog. So as Helen said, there's like 2% of prairie dog colonies left in North America, compared 98% of being cultivated. And ground squirrels are still poisoned and killed. Away from a prairie dog colony, you need a ground squirrel with a hole in the ground, and a badger, a fox, or a coyote to come in and excavate it, and then the burrowing owl can use that. So away from Grassland Park to the north, the whole burrowing owl ecosystem is based on ground squirrels having burrows that the predators go get. So keeping ground squirrels. I mean, I know ground squirrels are a problem in cropland, but really in cattle land, there's the odd instance of animals breaking your leg, but it's more of a rural myth. Helen interviewed 200 landowners, and not one of them had had an animal break its leg. They all knew it had happened, but couldn't actually cite an example. So Because the cows are more likely to die from lightning than they are from breaking the leg. And so the question is, do we really need to poison ground squirrels on pasture land?
Thank you.
Has there been any efforts for breeding programs and reintroduction?
Oh,
There has, but they've been unsuccessful for the most part. So there's 3 or 4 captive breeding facilities now in BC. So they're trying to reintroduce them into the Okanagan
all
Valley.
the time.
But that's been going on since the 1990s, so 30 years, and they still don't have a self-sustaining population. So what they've done is added another breeding facility. It's all done by nonprofit groups. There's a Burrowing Owl winery that helps sponsor it, but the Burrowing Owl winery is sitting on prime Burrowing Owl habitat. And I've been at meetings where in BC where we're discussing the loss of Burrowing Owl habitat to wineries, and we're sipping BC wine. Saying, guys, you can't have it both ways. There was captive breeding attempted in Manitoba, but it failed. And now there's another effort to try and raise more and reintroduce them because they got a couple of birds. So but they just appeared. So I pointed out the huge dispersal ability. They had a few turn up in southern Manitoba, so now they're trying to supplement that. But I don't think they fully accepted this whole concept of dispersal. Like the following year, those owls could be in South Dakota or Kansas or wherever. So it's good that they're producing more young owls, but don't expect them all to turn up back the following year. Just like with our supplemental feeding in the park, we've slowed down the decline, but we're not expecting the effect of that supplemental feeding to carry over in a big way the following year. If we double the number of young, we're not going to get twice as many birds back. It's not that simple.
So layering on of that then, for the owls that we have here in grasslands, are we banding them?
We're not banning them anymore. No, we did years ago when Helen and I were doing research here in the 1-4 in the EID, Eastern Area. We did a lot of banding. And that's where we know some of these return rates, some of the numbers that I quoted. I mean, I'm just skimming over 30 years of research and graduate students after 4 years with lots more numbers. But the bottom line is banded birds don't come back. And often when we were doing our studies, there'd be a pair of owls at a burrow where there was a pair the previous year, but neither are banded. We banded them the previous year. Neither of them or one out of the two might be banded.